This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Stories. We all love them. That's why we read books. But what happens when some of these stories seem too real to be true? You talk to the people that live them. Join me as I talk with Guy Morris on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors, Extraordinary People Edition. Of course, I am your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social medias. One link to a link tree will get you all of the links you need in the show notes. All right, so my guest today, I have to admit, has probably been one of the hardest guests to prepare for. He has so many facets of his life. Let me tell you who he is. He retired from a 36-year leadership career with a Fortune 100 software, high-tech, and global energy. He has also been a published songwriter for Disney Records, screenplay writer for Sojourn Entertainment, and a patented inventor, a Coast Guard charter captain, a PADI driver, an adventurer, and now an author and publisher of intelligent, well-researched thrillers. Since his 2021 debut as an indie author, Guy has released 3 pulse-pounding thrillers inspired by true stories, actual technologies, true global politics, and history. Multiple Kirkus recommendations have compared his style to Dan Brown, Iris Johansen, or Robert Ludlum. Guy's books have earned BookTrib's Best 25 Favorite Books of 2021, Reader's Favorite 2021 Gold Award, 2021 finalist for Ian Book of the Year, and semi-finalist for Cinematic Book. His articles have been published in Mystery and Suspense magazine. He has presented, moderated, or served as a panelist for the Greater Los Angeles Writers Conference. He is also a member of the Public Northwest Writers Association, the International Thriller Writers Association, Independent Book Publishers Association, and founder for the Author Event Network Association. He is the author of The Lost Ark, The Swarm, and The Curse of Cortez. Please welcome author and survivor, Guy Morris. Hey, Guy. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be with you.
It is a pleasure and an honor to meet you. You have a lot of layers to your life, so let's just kind of jump in. First of all, let's learn a bit more about you.
Shrek that way, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Guy. What was your early life like and what led you to where you are now?
Well, I try not to talk about my early life too often. It was rather miserable. I went to 16 schools before I dropped out in the 10th grade. I was a survivor of a lot of violence and alcoholism and physical abuse. I ran away first when I was 4, then again when I was 6. I was homeless, runaway. Those two didn't succeed. I was a homeless runaway for several months when I was 13, and then I finally left home for good when I was 15. I was able to get a GED because I had, from the time I was like 11 or 12, I went out and worked alongside migrant workers in the ranches of California. And so that was my early life. I mean, I don't want to go into the details, but it was enough to make me want to, in the age, maybe by the 2nd or 3rd grade, start thinking about suicide. But I survived that, and I realized that I didn't want that to be the story of my life. And while I had no idea how I would change it, I wanted it to change, and accepting Christ at an early age really helped. And then through a series of miracles, I can only say miracles, I was accepted into college. And I say it was a miracle because I had not taken any SAT scores. I had really bad grades in high school. I was functionally illiterate. I was 4 units deficient in basic college requirements, and somehow they let me in. And it only proved to me is like, I thought college was for smart people, but they'll let anybody in.
So you ran away at 4 and 13. Why did you run away at such a young age? What sparked that?
At 13, it was an episode with my stepfather where, long story short, I tried to shoot him, and he had, it was just he had done something that was just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, and I realized at that point that he would have put me in juvenile hall, and I was desperately trying to escape that situation.
So we don't have to go real deep into it, but from what I'm picking up, I just want to let you know, you're not alone, man. I'm a product of parental abuse and domestic abuse. I've actually been guest starring on some podcasts talking about those things. So I certainly can feel, how that is and how that's going for you. So now you got out of all of that. You went on to college. Tell us about the Fortune 100. How did you get into those things, and what did you do?
Well, while I was in college, I think, let me back up. It was a revolutionary experience for me. First off, I realized that it was my ticket out of poverty, and it was my one chance in life, and I was going to use it. I worked tirelessly, and I mean tirelessly. I probably slept about 4 hours a night for about 5 years. But one of the things I had to do was to create a macroeconomic model. Now, that's the kind of model that will predict the GNP and unemployment rate and interest rates and things like that. I made a deal. I tried to get the dean of the college to kind of deal with me and say, well, if I could beat everybody else in the school, he'd sponsor me for a scholarship. And there was no guarantees I'd get it, but he would try and sponsor me. Well, he agreed, I think because I was one of his pain-in-the-butt students. And as it turns out, I was so determined to prove myself that I worked in the data center from like midnight to 8 a.m. for like 5 months in a row. And I was trying to prove a new theory, a theory that our economy was now being driven. There was a productivity value to technology sales, and nobody else had ever really thought that through or proven it in any of the models. And ultimately my model outperformed the Federal Reserve, outperformed all the other universities, outperformed all the other banks, and by a wide margin. And so that got me a job at IBM. They got me a graduate scholarship, and that started my Fortune 100 career. So I was able to work in jobs where I was constantly trying to push the envelope. I was trying to repeat my college experience by pushing the envelope to say, things that some others thought were broken or unachievable, I wanted to try and somehow figure out a way to make that a reality. And so it was 36 years of me trying to tell some executives that they were wrong, and that it could be done, and constantly being told, are you willing to bet your career on that? So it was very stressful, to say the least. But I was able to, I was fortunate in that a good half of my career, I was writing my own job description.
So being that I'm sure a lot of these guys that you work with, high-end executives, probably came from a different lifestyle than you did, is there anything in your earlier life that you took with you that made you succeed with these corporate bigwigs?
I never drank the Kool-Aid. I was never convinced that the way that they wanted to approach corporate life, the way that they wanted to approach the business was 100% moral. And so I was constantly in jobs where I was questioning, and I would have to be in situations where I would question whether we were doing the right thing. I never fit in growing up. I was 16 schools, 10 years. I was constantly the new kid. And so when I didn't fit in corporate America, unless I was achieving something. At least I never felt like I fit in. I always felt a little bit like I was constantly having to prove myself, even when I proved myself. I think it gave me a conscience to kind of approach my career with, I don't just want to get the paycheck. I don't want to get, I'm not interested in the leadership career just for being a leader. The money was less important to me than what I did and how I did it. And so it made me both unique, it made me a valuable asset in some ways, but it made me a less valuable asset in other ways. I had to, in some cases, I turned down leadership opportunities because I was not interested in just doing the same routine kind of job and propagating sort of the leadership approach of where we should go and what we should do. And in some cases, I had bosses that really appreciated that and encouraged it. And in some cases, I had bosses who were absolutely not that were constantly trying to get me to be more of the corporate guy. And so I was struggling with that dichotomy, but I think my sense of independence, being alone as a young child, gave me a sense of I could do this myself. I didn't need to be the most popular guy at the business in order to succeed. And that was a real important thing for me to do because I needed to always think outside the box in order to do what I was doing.
So the one thing I want to touch on, because, with 2020, the pandemic, a lot of people went through a lot of things they feel like they can't overcome. I know you stated that earlier when you was going through your things in your early life, you felt like that you wanted to commit suicide a couple of times. Can you tell us how you came out of that? What brought you back from not wanting to do that?
Wow, that's a deep question. There was a stubbornness that if I gave in to that level, that I was defeated. And there was a part of me that wanted to move past it. That part of me that wanted to say, no, I may fail on my own. I left home when I was 15. I had no money, had no job prospects. I was hitchhiking across the desert to go join a Christian commune in Tucson. Everyone said I would fail. Everyone said I'd be coming home begging to just even have a home because I couldn't support myself. And there was a part of me that wanted to say, no, you've been trying to tell me I was worthless my whole life. This is my chance to prove you wrong. And I think there was a desire in me to prove him wrong. And I didn't know how. I didn't know how. As I said, I had no real, I was a musician, so I thought, well, maybe I'll become a musician. There's a long list of rock and roll stars who came from troubled backgrounds, had to overcome drug addictions and other things. And I wasn't sure that I was good enough to be a professional musician. But as I said, if I failed, I was going to fail on my own. I wasn't going to fail because I was told that was my only choice.
So through all of that, you became an author. So what inspired you to do that?
Well, the first inspiration was my son. I was a single parent to my son for a number of years. He loved to read. We would go to the library every week and get him books, and he would blow through them very quickly. And so there was a part of me that, and I had a lot of time alone. As a single parent with a lot of debt, I couldn't really go out and have an active social life or an active dating life. But I did have a lot of computers from work. I was before computers became ubiquitous, I was one of the major advocates for computers on every desk and in every department and trying to push what we could do with computing technology. And so I was always having experimental machines. Earliest personal computers were not only on my desk, but at my home. And so I thought, well, let me write him a story. At the time, he liked pirates and adventures and lost treasures and lost civilizations, the kind of things that every 12-year-old boy loves. And so I wrote him a short story called Paolo and the Shark, which was essentially a Hemingway Old Man in the Sea, but for a child, right? He was trying to find his own courage. He had a lot of bullies at school. He had a lot of things that he was afraid of, and I was trying to get him to realize that sometimes we don't get around our fears. We have to conquer them. We have to go through them. We have to face them head on. And so it was a great story. He loved it. His cousins loved it. I never tried to publish it. It was just something for the family. And I was going to write a sequel to it. But I wanted the sequel to be based on something historical. And so I started researching real Caribbean history, real pirate history, real mysteries that had never been solved, so I can kind of leverage off that. And I stumbled on one that had to do with Henry Morgan. Now, most people have heard of the sack of Panama, but most people don't really know the story. So in 1672, Henry Morgan took 36 ships, 2,000 men to raid the city of Panama, and ultimately lost 1,000 of his men even before he got there. But with only 1,000 men, he conquered the city. It burned to the ground for the most part, but he stayed for months and tortured people, brought back 30 tons of plunder, over at least 30 tons, and roughly $1 billion to $1.5 billion, 600 slaves. But when he got back to his fleet on the Caribbean side of the isthmus, he cheated everybody. He gave his men a pittance of the gold each, and then he disappeared with almost the entire treasure, 500 slaves on 3 ships, none of it ever seen again. But Morgan survived. He actually showed up in Jamaica 4 months later with an empty ship and was arrested immediately by the British because when he raided Panama, he had broken a peace treaty. Well, in London, the guy's a freaking hero. You know, he had broken the financial back of the Spanish. He opened the Caribbean to the English and the Dutch and the French and everybody. And so they knighted him Sir Henry Morgan. They sent him back to Jamaica with a garrison of soldiers as lieutenant governor to say, get rid of piracy. Well, instead of going after anybody except for one man who was the captain of the Caguay, one of the ships on his raid to Panama, who cheated him, he went into this haunted, drunken, depressed debauchery, and then burned his logbooks before he died. 3 years after he died, the whole city of Port Royal, including his grave, sinks into the ocean. The locals of the time said they had been cursed by Morgan. I could not put that story out of my head. It was a fascinating story. The treasure went somewhere. It wasn't lost at sea because he had an empty ship. He unloaded it someplace. So I spent well over a decade searching 2 things. First, what happened to 30 tons of plunder, 3 ships, and 500 souls, under the idea that by now somebody had to have found something. And then 2, and in fact somebody did, and that I put that in my book. Secondly, was what happened to Morgan? What traumatized him so profoundly that he would give up $1 billion that he had already killed thousands of people to get, and be such a wuss about it that he had to burn his logbooks. Well, it took me so long to do the research, and I kept, the more I would research, the more questions I would have, and the more questions I would have, the longer it would take the research. By the time I was done, my son was grown and gone, so it was no longer a children's books. And so it became sort of a project that I had on the side as I worked my career. It was just something I had to do. But it ultimately that treasure tied back to a guy named Mitchell Hedges, F.A. Mitchell Hedges, who was famous for finding the crystal skull. He had dug on this island for 7 years before he claimed he had found Atlantis, which was an unusual claim. And then he disappeared with in 1911, he disappeared with $6 million in gold, which today would be worth about $250 million. When he was asked about how he found the gold, and he had smelted it all down, so nobody could really tell the origins of it. But when he was asked about how he found the gold, even he lied, and he was afraid to really talk about what had really happened. He went and bought a castle, wrote his memoir, but in his memoir he never talked about the gold or the crystal skull. I was ultimately, once I had a location that was probable, and a lot of reasons it was the probable location, I started researching that island to learn that island had been there was an Inquisition massacre 100 years before that ended a 2,000-year pilgrimage to this island before anybody bothered to ask, why are people canoeing 50 miles to get here? What's so special about this place? That pilgrimage tied me to the 5,000-year Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar tied me to the Mayan creation myth, which said that the world had been created and destroyed 3 times before the arrival of the Spanish. In the second creation and destruction, the world had been destroyed by a great fire and a flood, which, when I tied the timeline back using the calendar and everything else, tied to the Younger Dryas asteroid 13,000 years ago. So it was a really amazing, epic adventure that I had really created. So I had to create an equally epic story, of a modern day story of people going through an adventure through which they discovered all of these dots connecting. So it was, and during that time I was down in the Caribbean. I had a condo in Cancun for a while. I used to go diving places looking for clues. I'd go to look the Mayan ruins looking for clues. I'd talk to old Mayan shamans trying to understand some of the stories. And through that time, a cartel thug who was doing dirty work for the Zeta cartels. He was actually an Israeli. He was wanted by Interpol, wanted by the FBI, and he had conned his way into my condo and then basically said that he wasn't leaving, and that if I messed with him, he would kill me. So I had to, through this adventure, I had to kind of take care of his. Now, I grew up on the street. I'm a really small man. I'm not a really big guy, but there was something in me that when he did that, my wife was standing right next to me when he threatened to kill me. Her eyes got wide, but I stepped up a couple steps so I could look him in his eyes, and my response was a little bit like, "Oh no, you didn't." So I told him he didn't have the cojones to mess with me, and that he had 2 days to get out of my condo, or he would regret ever meeting me. So it took me a few months, but I ultimately cost him everything he ever owned at that point, and I made sure that no one would ever rent him any place in Cancun or Playa del Rey, the Yucatan again. He got arrested for a number of different things. Yeah. So ultimately, and then when I got him out of my condo, I put everything he owned on the street, including a big safe. Within 24 hours, the locals had decimated everything he had. So he made such an impact on me that I decided to make him a villain in the book. And that was the Curse of Cortez. So that's how I started. Now, the second incident that really inspired me to keep writing was I had done early experimental work in business operations using an early stage of artificial intelligence called expert knowledge systems. It was before machine learning. It was a lot more kludgy back then. It had a lot of potential. And so in my research, I had discovered that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia, which is a well-known NSA spy lab. They do cryptology, they do signals research, they created the Stuxnet virus that brought down the Iranian centrifuges. And so I was captivated. Really short article. But I kept asking myself, I said, well, either this is a typo. It was an Associated Press article. So I said, well, either somebody at Associated Press should have said it was lost, should have said it was stolen, should have said it malfunctioned. But they used the verb escape. Now, escape implies intent. It implies some level of intelligence. It implies the ability for the program to move itself and then erase its trail so that the NSA didn't know where to go look for it. And I thought, well, that's amazing technology. I said, well, so I actually spent several months trying to back into reverse engineer the type of architecture it would take for that to happen. And then I asked the next question, which was, well, okay, so if it had that astounding capability to basically be a program in stealth, what was it designed to do? if I put my James Bond Q hat on, and I wanted a program that could basically stay hidden, what would I want that program to do? And so I came up with a list of functions that I would want that program to do, and made sure that they all tied back to some real level of technology, maybe pushed out a few years. And about that time, long story short, 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. Apparently, they were rather perturbed that I had figured out something they thought should be top secret. And I was like, hey, guys, if you want it to be more secret, you got to be more careful. Don't blame me that I'm smart. My wife, who at the time, we'd only been married a couple of years. My second wife, we've now been married for 30, but at the time we hadn't been married that long. And she was like, okay, who are you? Why are the FBI in my house, and what did you do? So that was the inspiration for my artificial intelligence espionage series, which is Swarm and the Last Ark.
So we covered all three of those because those are my next questions. So that was great. So that was the Curse of Cortez, the Swarm, and the Lost Ark, guys. Those are his books. If you're as intrigued as I am, please be sure to go pick them up, and we'll tell you how to get all of those at the end of the show for sure. So through all the things you've been through, you became a man of faith, became a Christian. Can you tell me what faith and being a Christian has done for you now after all of this?
It allowed me to reset my priorities. It allowed me to refocus where my heart would be. And frankly, it's accepted well, if accepted in the right way. Christianity is not about Christian politics. It's not about political power. It's not about accumulating wealth. It's not about fame. It's about holding a mirror up to yourself and comparing that to who the Lord says we should be and making changes. Now, for me, that was a decades-long process. I didn't know at the time, for many years, but my childhood had left me with, and I was diagnosed with this later in my 50s, that I had complex post-traumatic stress. And so that PTSD had created a lot of dysfunction in my life, from depression to addictions to relationship issues to misset priorities and a number of things. And it took a while for me to one by one kind of start to shed those and deal with those, to come face to face that I was a single parent, but I was also an alcoholic. And I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes my mother had made. And so for me, about being with Christ is about putting those truths above the things that I'm told in the world I should be focused on, like my wealth and my power and my success and things like that. And I was successful. If I hadn't had post-traumatic stress, I would have been even way more successful. But it allowed me to really think in terms of, yes, I could be successful, but at what price? Now, one of the interesting twists that came out of that was Christianity teaches a lot about prophecy. And within the church, there were a lot of people who either said, no, yeah, prophecies will all happen back in the Roman times, or Revelations was all about Roman times, or they'll say Revelations, yeah, it's true, but it's not going to happen for another 100 years. It's 2 or 3 generations, the next generation or the generation after that. And then there's some people who would say, well, no, we're going through those times right now. So as an analytical person, I wanted to say, well, and they would always point out the same sort of things. Well, in the last days would be like the days of Noah, people would be immoral. I said, well, people have always been immoral. So is there anything more objective that I could look at is there another, people would take the allegories of prophecy and they would interpret them all different ways that in my view was highly biased through either cultural, religious, nationalistic, or some sort of bias that would basically distort, I think, how they were looking at the allegories themselves. I actually came to the conclusion that I should be looking not at the allegory as much as the outcome of the allegory. And this started when I was reading a National Geographic magazine that talked about the loss of fish stocks on a global level. In Asia, North America, Latin America, certainly in Europe. And I realized that related to a prophecy of the seven trumpets that said that third of the fish of the sea would die, third of the birds of the air would die, a third of the beasts of the land would die, the rivers of the world would become polluted and undrinkable. And I realized that all of those things had already occurred. And they were documented in scientific magazines, environmental magazines, National Geographic, all kinds of places where that level of global environmental destruction had already happened. And in fact, there were a number of books that were starting to come out that we were in the sixth extinction. And I started saying, well, gee, what's the probability of all of that happening in a single generation and without a supervolcano or an asteroid? So I actually developed a rather sophisticated regression probability model to try and calculate it. I'm the Sheldon geek who says, do you want to just love the hypothesis? Do you want to do the math? I want to do the math. And it came out to an astounding. And I only used 15 prophecies because that was all I had the time for, and I could get the validation for at the time. But it included the seven trumpets and a few others, the creation of Israel, which was in itself is a singular world event. And nowhere in all of history has a world body gotten together and said, hey, you know what? We want to give this people that were dispersed from their land 2,000 years ago, we want to give them their traditional land back. Now, whether you like Israel, have issues with Palestinians, it doesn't matter about the politics. The fact that it happened is a singular event. So I actually calculated and came to a 1 in 1.4 trillion that it was against random chance. So that started me looking at the world in a much more objective, filtered view to say, how probabilistic is that? Does that align to a prophecy? Can I count? Does that really have an alignment? If that alignment from our reality that we get so inundated on a daily basis, we kind of lose the impact of it. But if I stopped and really looked at it and I said, does that incredibly low probability that these are all by random chance? If that's true, what else in Scripture that I should be paying attention to that might also be true? That might have to do with more of an individual spiritual foundation. So my faith has been good and bad. When I was going through my addictions and issues, it was very hard for me to feel like I was a good Christian. I wasn't. But I would use it as a way of saying, okay, well, this is my opportunity to change. So the theme of prophecy filters into my books Swarm, and actually in all of them in some way or another. In Curse of Cortez, it had to do with Mayan prophecies. In Swarm and The Last Ark has to do with biblical prophecy. And in Swarm and The Last Ark, the program that had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories, I turned into a character in the story named Sylvia, sophisticated language virtual intelligence algorithm. Sylvia has now decoded end time prophecy, and none of the other characters really understand what that means. So it creates a real great dynamic for me to look at world events, not from a Democrat eye or Republican eye, or not from, to basically give this sort of agnostic viewpoint that kind of strips away a lot of the dogma and the doctrine and just looks at prophecy as a way of saying it's not about how God will destroy humanity, but how humanity is kind of doing this to itself.
I'll tell you, it is no secret to this show. I am a Christian. I was raised that way. But of course, as we become adults, we decide which way to go. And there is a lot of things in my life that I know I would not be here if it wasn't for the Lord himself. There's been a lot of things that's he's manifested himself to me to know that he's there. And I agree with you on all of that. I mean, I've never talked to anybody who put it more plainly than that. And I do believe a lot of things that Revelation preached about has happened for years. It's just that we don't want to pay attention to that. And people would rather say, well, how can you say you serve a merciful God when all these things in the world is happening? But he told you that, right? He said, I give you a choice, who to go, who to follow. And humanity is doing this to itself. So I agree with that.
And so the merciful God is that he warned us. He warned us that this would be the outcome of our own world systems, that this would be the outcome of where we would end up eventually. And if we're willing to take that as a warning sign, then the response as a human, as each person, as individual, to say, well, if all that's true, I can't change how there's no way we're going to redirect all of the world systems into a different way. You know, we've got despots like Xi and Putin and you know, super polarization in our own politics here in America even. You know, there's no way the world banking system is pretty much, they're not going to just lay down and say, hey, we were wrong, we shouldn't be so wealthy. So none of those things are on a trajectory to really change in a fundamental way. So the question then becomes, as individuals, how do we respond? And so that's, I think, one of the themes of the book is that these things are inevitable. Therefore, our only choice that we have is how do we respond to it as individuals. And so it was I love the format because it gives me a way of looking at the world with unfiltered eyes and not trying to use these things as a way to proselytize as much as provoke thought and inward choices. And
I appreciate that because I think this is where we are now. It doesn't do any good to preach at people, right?
Exactly.
So we can just start the conversation, invoke the thought and say, if you look at it this way, maybe you'll have a different outcome or a different opinion of that. So I do definitely appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about the association that you started called the Author Event Network and why you actually started it.
Well, I didn't really get serious about writing until I retired. And I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. I'm horrible at sitting around and just watching television or just playing golf or just doing something, unless I'm on a boat. That's the only time I can ever sit back and actually relax. And I live here in the Northwest, so it's really too cold to go on boats very often. So, but I needed something to really give myself a sense of purpose. So I've read articles that say that people who retire and they're pursuing a new career, it's now their third act, right? So I wanted to figure out what my third act would be, and it was pretty clear to me at that point that I wanted to write. But as an indie author, and I'm very impatient. The kind of stuff I write about is not the kind of thing that agents and publishers are going to gravitate to immediately, no matter how well written, because it challenges the status quo. It challenges, it has the potential, because it deals with politics and religion and all of these things. It has the potential of offending somebody. And so they try to shy away from that. They'd rather have a romance author or a crime, series that just dealt with, the bad guy that the cops actually catch. And so I decided to self-publish. Big part of self-publishing was being able to hire the right people, hire editors, hire proofers, hire good designers, get a high production quality product. And I figured in my experience in business, I could do that. What I underestimated was how hard it would be to market and promote. Now, early on, I had done some book signings, and really good book signings, a couple of Barnes & Nobles where I sold a lot of books. But I realized that those were one-offs. I couldn't repeat them too often. And so I was actually at a big event here locally that attracted it's called the Blackberry Festival. And I was invited by a group of guys who basically went down to this one event every year, and they sold books. They did signed editions. And I sold as many at that event that I sold at my book signings, or more, actually more. And I started realizing, I said, well, wait a minute, there's probably about 20, 30 major events per year that go on around the Seattle Northwest area. This could be a repeatable, rather than sort of a book signing at Barnes & Noble that takes a lot of cajoling, and I could do it once, maybe after I released each new book. I could do this more often. But in order to do that, I needed to create an association for a number of reasons. One, if I went and applied to these events to say, hey, my name is Guy, I'd like to come in and sell my books, maybe I'll bring in a friend or two to share the tent with me, it's not credible for them wanting to basically bring you in. But if I said, well, I'm part of a legal association of authors, local authors, who are both award-winning, published, and accomplished indie authors of multiple genres, it has an appeal. So I realized that we could actually create multiple events per year to get in front of the reader. And when I did get in front of the reader, it was eye-opening as well. I got to engage the reader, not just to say, here's my book, my main character is so-and-so, my plot is XYZ. It allowed me to engage them in some of the backstory that we're talking about. It allowed me to have a deeper conversation with them. I could see in their eyes when the pitch was either going, ooh, or, I could get them to sign up for my newsletter, and I made my margins were the best that I could possibly hope for, right? Because I cut out Amazon, I cut out the bookstores, I cut out the distributors. It was the price of my book and the cost of the book, and I was able to keep the rest. And so I realized that if I formed this association and I got enough people involved with me, we could do 20 plus events per year. And that actually adds up. So I actually, this is now our second year. We started last year. We did about 10 events last year. And it took a while to get enough people to really do some of the bigger ones. And they were all a little bit, we're not sure this is really what we want to do. And to some extent, there's a little bit of a snootiness with some authors that they only want to do signing if it's at a big book event or a big bookstore. But I got other authors to say they can engage a lot more new readers that would discover them by going to the local festival or fair or major event, where in some of these events you might get anywhere from a few hundred to 50,000 people attending. And that's a constant flow of people by the tent all day long for days. Sometimes there's like 2 or 3 days. And so it does take time, but this has now usurped my sales. I get more money. After the cost of the event, the cost of the books, everything, I'm making far more money doing that than Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the online channels. And I'm helping other authors succeed as well. So I had one author told me that he sold twice as much. He made twice as much money last year and he only did 2 or 3 of our major events. He didn't do too many, but he did twice as well last year as he'd done the year before that. And so it's allowing authors of every genre to basically get out, engage their reader, build their platform, and make more money. And it's been a really great experience so far. We've now started a Portland chapter, and we're trying to see if there's a model for us to basically make this a national type of thing in other metropolitan areas.
Well, if you are taking authors, be sure to let me know. I don't know if you listen to my show, but a lot of the authors I interview are independent authors. You guys are part of the reason I started this podcast for exactly what you said. I was reading all these great books by all these independent authors and nobody knew who they were. And I was like, if I can do my part to get them out there, maybe people will start picking up their books, and it's been working. So, like there's a Kirsten Modulin, Shannon Jump, AJ Campbell, Sarah Ennis. All these women are independent. And I know that they're probably benefit from a network like that. And none of them are snooty. I mean, Kirsten Modulin does all kinds of book signings throughout the year, whether they're big or small. I've seen Sarah Ennis and those guys appear just for their fans alone, sign books just to do that. And they're all independent. So we'll talk for sure. So if you taking applications, man, I know there's a lot of authors out there that would benefit from it.
Yeah, if you're not in the Saddle, Portland area, we'll talk to you about how to start a chapter in your local area. If you go to authoreventnetwork.com, that'll lead you to the application and get our attention, and we go from there. Since
you started writing late in life, I think this is good because I've actually talked to a couple authors that said, man, I want to write this book, but I'm too old. So you started after you retired. Not a young buck, some of these guys are starting at 19 and 20, but your 3 books that you've written becomes like best-selling books. They get awards. How did that make you feel when that happened?
There's certainly a level of gratification that, and I'm more pleased with the reviews that I get that compare me to some of my author heroes like Dan Brown, Robert Ludlum. I had one review recently that said if Dan Brown and Tom Clancy were to write a book together, it would look like The Last Ark. And so that's certainly gratifying. But as much because I think the books are fun and really great reads, they're exciting, they're good thrillers, but I get to embed some of these bigger themes in them. Where are we going as a people on the planet? And what kind of choices should we be making? I can demonstrate that through the characters. So it keeps me very busy between research, which is very time consuming, trying to write. I'm working on the next book right now and trying to work on the outline for the next stage of this process, and running Author Event Network and doing promotion. As I said, I don't like leisure. I like staying busy. I like staying productive, and it's been a way of doing so without the pressures of being in corporate world, where I was in meetings all day and constant new goals. So it's been rewarding. It's been rewarding, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the process. I'm enjoying learning how to be good at something new, which is always a good avenue in life. Don't be afraid to suck at something new, and then keep at it until you don't suck. So that's been a good process for me to do. So I've been really enjoying it, and I work long days. It would not be unusual at all for me to quit between 1 and 2 a.m. Now I let myself sleep in, which I couldn't do in the corporate world, but which is nice. And then I'm at the age where the occasional nap really comes in handy. But yeah, it's been great to basically stay. I think every person needs to feel like they have a purpose. And if you get to a stage in your life, I feel sorry for some people that I know that retire because they're kind of too old to do the work grind. But then they think that, okay, I'll just have leisure time. And that's enjoyable only for a little while. And then you could see the restlessness in their eyes. You can see the lack of the fire going out. And my hope is that by creating a writing career, third act, this is something I can do until I'm way older than I am now. And I can build that up over time at my own pace and my own purpose. And it's given me a purpose in life that's beyond making money for somebody else.
So can you tell us what you would like everyone to take away from your story today, as well as why you think everyone should go out and pick up a copy of your books?
More from my story, I think I'd probably say that no matter how difficult your situation is, and there were a number of times it looked pretty hopeless for me. That invest in yourself. No matter how small or how big you can make that investment, keep investing. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep trying something new. Keep trying to be better at yourself. And not in a way that it's only about making more money, but how to be a better version of yourself. Don't be afraid to face your fears and your flaws with a rigorous honesty and passion to change. Because ultimately, regardless of whether you make money or don't, you'll benefit from that. That will carry with you, and do so with the light of, if having knowing that you have a savior that cares for you can make a big difference in that process. And it can make a monumental difference in that process, as opposed to thinking that it's just up to you and you're on your own and you don't have a community of other people and you don't have any other help. What I would hope people would take from my book is that there's fascinating, incredibly intriguing mysteries in life, both in our history and in our current world, that if we can, I'm hoping that you buy the book so that you'll learn about the real world, about the real issues of artificial intelligence and how it's being used, that you can start looking at the world rather than from a red or a blue lens, from an agnostic political lens, and asking real questions about where we're going and how that affects you. I think these books are written so that they're page turners, they're fun, you've got warm characters. I've avoided using sort of the standard Navy SEAL, CIA, can kill you 10 ways before breakfast, sir, kind of characters, and focusing on real people and how they're going through all of these things. And I think that they're my reviewers and from the industry all the way down to the readers are really loving it, and I think that you'd really enjoy. It's a great way of having a fun read experience, and that will actually leave you thinking and provoking thought and kind of change and wanting more.
Well, Guy, I certainly thank you for coming on the show today. It's been extraordinary. I've certainly learned a lot from you just in this brief hour that we've shared together. I would like to invite you back because I am going to read all 3 of your books. I'd like to have you come back on so we can actually have just a discussion around your books if you would like to do that.
Would love to do that. But obviously, I've only touched on just a tiny fraction of the things that go on in the books. And I think the last arc has some amazing archaeology and some amazing revelations. And so, yeah, I'd love to come back.
All right, well, I'll be definitely getting on that, and we will definitely have you back on. So, again, man, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I gained a lot, and I know my audience have. So thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, there you have it. You heard it from the incredible Mr. Guy Morris. Please go out and pick up his book, Swarm, The Last Arc, and The Curse of Cortez. You can pick them up all on Amazon. So if you are a Kindle reader, you can pick those up just for your $9.99 subscription price. I remind all of you, please just don't download the book. He does not get paid for his work unless you are reading those. He gets paid by the page. Please make sure you pick that up. Also, you can find it at his website that will be listed in the show notes as well as on my website. All right, guys. So once again, thank you for joining in. Hope you guys are being safe, and always remember, always stay humble. A little love and compassion goes a long way. And this is the podcast where 2 passions becomes 1. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.